welcome on the Carnivore Renaissance channel. Today I have the immense pleasure and honor to have on the channel Professor Bart Kay. And Professor, welcome.
Thank you.
So for whoever might not know who is Professor Bart Kay, could the man explain himself? Who is he regarding the field of science?
Sure. About 20-something years ago, I got involved in being an academic, and I was teaching health science, and over a roughly 20-year career doing that, I specialized in 3 different areas during that time, and those were the physiology of rest and exercise, then human nutrition, then cardiovascular pathophysiology, so what causes heart disease and what doesn't. And then, of course, overarching all of that is an understanding of research design, statistical procedure and inference, etc. And then a few years back, I decided I didn't want to be doing that anymore. And these days, I am a social media influencer of some ill repute, and I am part of the marketing team for an enormously brilliant product involved in adult stem cell release, etc. And that keeps me pretty busy these days. Yeah,
Okay.
so that's where I've come from.
Great. Thank you. And may I ask you why you didn't want to continue in the academia?
Yeah, there were several reasons. Partly it was around the fact that for my entire academic career, I was swimming against the current. I was not happy with the consensus view on many topics, and I wasn't prepared to stand up in front of fee-paying students and say things to those students that I knew absolutely to be false. I don't think that's fair.
Exactly.
And that often had me at odds with management, shall we say. So it was partly that. Partly it was the fact that in academia, an agitator such as myself doesn't get promoted beyond a certain level. There's kind of a glass ceiling there. And I'd reached that, and I was never going to earn more than that or do more than that, I guess. And so, yeah, it was just like, well, there are greener pastures elsewhere. I'd heard about this crazy idea that you can make some money being an online social media influencer. Turns out I was wrong. You can't. It's impossible. What you have to do is monetize your social media influence sphere in another way, because you don't get paid a lot of money to actually produce videos. And and you'd know as well as I do that you can put your heart and soul into these things, and you can spend days and days and days editing, perfecting, and getting these things right. And you may or may not actually get reasonable viewership for it, just depending on what the YouTube algorithm is deciding as to whether this particular video is going to be seen by a lot of people or it's not. And so there's a bit of learn to play the game, sure. But I really think that each individual channel has its own kind of limit imposed externally, I think. But that's just an opinion, whatever.
Great. Thank you. As an introduction to this interview, could you also briefly tell us what you advocate when it comes to human nutrition?
Yes, so I advocate for a species-appropriate, species-specific diet for all animals. So if you say to me, what should a dog eat? Well, dogs eat meat, organs, and bones, preferably raw. They don't eat grains, and they don't eat anything manufactured by humans. Ours don't, anyway. If you ask me what a cat should eat, well, etc., etc., etc. Horses, etc., etc. Humans as well are an animal, believe it or not. And we also have a niche. We have a species-specific diet. And everything we've always been taught is that humans should eat an omnivorous diet.
Mm-hmm.
We should eat some meat, some fruit and vegetables, some hard, healthy whole grains. Balance is a good thing in our diets, is what we're taught, isn't it? All of that is nonsense. Human beings are clearly obligate hyper-carnivores. The appropriate diet for a human being is the meat, by which I mean muscle meat and not organs, associated fat of animals, preferably mostly large ruminants.
Why?
Well, when we look at the ring-fenced area of ideology known as human nutrition science, what you'll find is thousands and thousands and thousands of research papers which are pseudoscientific claptrap. They're not properly experimentally controlled. They're not observed for long enough periods of time. They're not big enough groups of people that are being studied in even pseudo-experimental work like short-term metabolic ward studies for a couple of weeks on something. So if we want to talk about long-term health outcomes in human beings over decades, and we want to say this causes that, we actually need to keep those people under control, observation, under lock and key for decades to make sure that nothing confounds our research finding. Now, obviously, you can't get that through ethics. There's no way. And it's not practical. It costs too much anyway. So instead, there's this pile of work called the prospective cohort studies, often called nutritional epidemiology.
Mm-hmm.
These are large studies where hundreds of thousands of people are observed without control, without experimental intervention at all. Go live your lives. Come back to us in 10 years, 11 years, 15 years, however long the study is. And based on what you tell us you've been eating for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
we can now say absolutely that red meat causes this, that, or the other thing to occur. No, not at all. That's all there is in human nutrition science. There's nothing in the middle where it would need to be, the stuff that would be properly randomized, properly controlled, properly powered, properly tenured, metabolic ward lock-in studies over decades on large numbers of human beings to prove absolutely this causes that.
I see.
It doesn't exist. Okay, so what did I do? I had a look outside that ring-fenced area. What actual science can inform us? And I found a couple of slam dunks, I think. Here's one. In your long bones, there is a protein called collagen.
Mm-hmm.
Collagen is actually the most prevalent of the proteins in your body. And it just so happens it's also in the long bones. And this collagen remains viable in skeletal remains for millennia. It dries out, it remains there, it stays inside the long bone as long as the long bone is not completely pounded to dust or whatever. So we can come along up to 100,000 years later and say, oh, look, a human femur. Cut it open, get the collagen out of it that's still there, and test that collagen and see what the isotopic makeup of the nitrogen in that collagen is. Nitrogen comes in several isotopes, which differ in the number of neutrons in the nucleus of the molecules, which makes the nitrogen heavier or lighter. And it turns out that one of those isotopes is associated with plant eating and the other one's associated with meat eating. So we have a look at the balance of the isotopes in the collagen, and that tells us, slam dunk, absolutely no question, what that human being did eat while it was alive 100,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
all human skeletal remains found all over the planet of any age over 11,000 years, they all tell the same story.
Yeah.
Human beings absolutely ate meat, and more meat and fat.
Yeah.
80% of the diet. The other 20% was like roots, fibrous roots. Not even like tubers like today. Just rooty, horrible, whatever. So that's the diet for a human being. I mean, we don't need the roots. I think they were eaten for a subsistence situation when we couldn't take down a mammoth or something like that. So there's one slam dunk. Okay, that says we don't have to guess anymore. We don't have to say, oh, look, we think humans ate this much of that and that much of the other thing, because those are guesswork things. You look at the nitrogen in the bones and you go, there's the answer. No question.
Yeah.
So given that's what humans did eat, for we think probably actually about 4.5 million years leading up to the current day. So humans and pre-humans, ancestors of ancestors, speciations of humans that weren't yet quite humans, all the way back 4.5 million years. Because human beings have been around about 350, give or take, in our current form.
Yeah. Which might evolve.
Given that that's what given that that's what we have eaten, what that tells us is that positive and negative selection pressures on our bodies, our metabolic system, our organ systems, whatever, have all been guided towards that diet. Ergo, our body is optimized for that diet. The third slam dunk is I have now been telling people for 10 years that they ought to eat a highly carnivorous diet as well.
Mm-hmm.
And people have been doing that. I'm not the only one telling people to do this, by the way. There are others.
I'm telling too.
But we now have this community of millions of human beings that we know about who are eating a carnivorous diet. And universally, the feedback is incredibly positive in terms of health outcomes.
Yeah.
I think we're done. And this human nutrition science, this ring-fenced area of ideology, worthless. Absolutely worthless. So,
okay. There are some topics I would like to discuss with you today, more specifically, and as a personal trainer for 15 years who advocated to clients the infamous calories in, calories out false theory, I would love you to tell us why this construct is scientifically wrong and maybe why, in your opinion, it was pushed this way through the medical establishment and the fitness industry.
Okay. I can do that, absolutely. But let me start by asking you a question, just to set the scene here.
Yeah.
Let's say I go to France tomorrow and I jump off the airplane and I go to the coffee vendor at the airport and I order up a large coffee and I put $5 New Zealand down on the counter to pay for that coffee. What is that vendor going to tell me? We don't take New Zealand dollars. This is France. We take francs. You need to pay for your coffee with francs. So if I then said, well, don't be so ridiculous. There's a conversion. You know how much this is. You can look it up. That's not how it works, is it? Because that coffee seller does not have the equipment, the kit, to transmute my New Zealand dollars into French francs. Doesn't work. That New Zealand dollar is of no value to that coffee seller. Now, let's do some substitution. Instead of the coffee seller, let's talk about the human body as being the coffee seller, doing whatever it needs to do. And let's think about myself with my New Zealand dollars as the intake of food, energy, food energy, right? The calorie is a measurement of energy, energy being a construct, an idea. The only way that we can measure energy is actually by measuring the effect of energy on some system. In the case of the calorie, it's a measurement specifically of heat energy. How is it manifest? It's manifest as photons. Here's how you work out how many calories there are in a piece of food. You take a sample of that food and you put it inside this piece of kit called a bomb calorimeter, which is a closed, sealed chamber in which the food sample is put. And then outside that chamber is a bath of water.
Okay.
And then that's all sealed in a second. Okay. What we then do is we hit the button and we send a large electrical current through that food sample and we combust it completely to water plus carbon dioxide plus a small amount of ash plus some energy in the form of photons, which are the force carrier, the force boson of the electromagnetic field, and also the way in which heat is transferred from one place to another. And then the water in the bomb calorimeter warms up by a certain amount under the influence of this exploding food. And then we say, oh, look, that's how many calories it is. That's awesome. Except that's not how your body derives energy from food. So we're back to the New Zealand dollars versus francs argument. Oh, yeah, but that's mathematically the same thing. What am I talking about? Fine. But in practice, in terms of its utility, no good. Because the estimation of actual energy derivable via metabolic process based on how much energy you can get from something by exploding it quickly, completely different numbers. Not the same thing at all. The estimation is going to be wildly out in terms of actual intakes every time a coconut, basically. Add to that the fact that on the labels on food in most countries, the calorie count is allowed to be out by 20% plus or minus.
Okay.
So there's a 40% range that it can be within. Basically, if you studiously wrote down the exact amount of exactly everything that you eat in a week, you're not going to get close to your actual intake effectively of energy from food. Because human bodies run on chemical energy, which is a form of potential energy. They don't run on heat energy.
Okay.
If we could run on heat energy, we wouldn't need food. All we'd need to do is go and sit in the sun.
Exactly.
Doesn't work, does it? So this whole idea is fundamentally ridiculous from the floor up. Next thing, let's say you could accurately count your calories in, which you can't, but let's say you could. Great, now tell me how many calories you're spending. How are you going to measure that? By looking up a table that tells you how much energy you're spending based on your weight and activity level? Are you stoned? No, that's not going to work. So here's the take home for calories in, calories out, folks. The only way this works is if you tell your client to undercut how much they're eating by 500 calories a day or more ongoingly. That's the only way that you get past this error so that you know that you're actually going to get the result. Is it a good idea to undercut your calories by 500 a day for an extended period of time? The answer is no, that's not a good idea. So we need to stop with this nonsense, calories in, calories out. Rubbish. What you need to do is eat a species-specific, species-appropriate diet and let it take care of itself over time, actually. You don't have to count anything. Not a damn thing. There you go. There it is.
But why do you think that was pushed through the medical establishment and the fitness industry for so long. If that's so, it's quite simple to understand. I mean, the way you explain it is, I think, reachable by many people. But why this is lasting so long?
Well, the idea as it is currently sold, calories in, calories out, is a reduction. It's a simplification of what is ostensibly a quite complex thing. And if you can give people some kind of a gauge, this is the thinking, which I don't subscribe to, okay? But this is the thinking. If we give people some kind of a gauge that they can subscribe to measure their food intake somehow, that's the tool they can use to moderate their food intake. It's utter nonsense. But we have to give people something, is what the thinking is. We can't just say, just eat the right stuff and relax about it. Well, why can't we? Because that's the correct course of action.
Yeah.
Eat the correct stuff, and the amount of that will self-manage, because it turns out that it's the bad stuff that you shouldn't be eating that messes up your hunger and satiety signaling. That's the reason that people overeat. So we stop causing them to overeat by telling them to eat the right stuff that they don't need to count any of. Jobs is good in. We're done. Solved. So it's a simplification, and it's like, well, this is inherently complex. Joe Blogs, Joe Public can't possibly have any hope of understanding this, because we're the scientists here and you're just the plebs. So trust me, I'm the science. Don't question the science. Calories are a good measurement of heat energy. Trust me on that. It's like that.
Okay.
In the same way that there are many other ideas pushed out there that are just wrong.
Yeah.
Hence is why I didn't get along so well in academia for 20 years. But people often say, oh, you got fired from being an academic. No, that never happened. I was an academic for 20 years. I left when I decided to. Okay? Right, what's next?
Okay. So just to stay on the energy side, in order to sustain any form of physical activity, is it possible for any human beings to provide enough energy only from endogenous and exogenous animal fat sources? In other words, is it possible to function while performing any sports without carbs?
Yes. The exact requirement for exogenous carbohydrate in the human diet is not 1 single gram ever, whether you are an athlete or not. The whole idea taught in exercise physiology that you must have carbohydrates to perform well in sport and physically demanding activity is another falsehood. It is not true. Basically,
Okay.
all the carbohydrate you need can be generated by the human body itself. It's called gluconeogenesis. You'll find it in any textbook you look at for physiology. This is not a new idea. We've known about this all along. So the argument, but your muscles need carbohydrates to exercise. Yes, that's true. You're right. But that doesn't mean you need to eat any. But your brain needs glucose to run. If without glucose, you'll die. Yes, that's true as well. But still don't need to eat any, because your body will still manufacture it itself. And in fact, if you pour carbohydrates into your body on top of what your body's doing, trying to make its own, that's what messes everything up. I was talking a few minutes ago about hunger and satiety signaling's getting messed up. That's how you do it, among other things. When we think about what the planet was like for the last, let's say even just the last 350,000 years for human beings, most of that time, it was glaciated. Most of the planet. There was very little in the way of plant material that was available for humans to eat. There was the fruits and vegetables that are available to us today did not exist. They are all human inventions. They are all selectively bred for. A lot of people don't understand, for example, that all the cruciferous vegetables, they all come from the same plant. It's just been selectively bred to be 4 or 5 different sorts of that plant. In the same way that dogs have been bred to have different sort of breed of dog that look quite different, are obviously different, but are still dogs. The same is true of all the cruciferous vegetables for a start. They all come from the wild mustard plant.
Mm-hmm.
Plants are full of toxins, anti-nutrients, contraindicated fiber, which I presume you might want to get onto at some point. Plants are not your friend in the diet. They will mess you up, it seems.
Yeah.
Okay. And plants is where you get carbohydrates from. That's why I'm talking about plants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, still in the sports field, as a previous endurance competitive athlete and as the son of an elite marathon runner who ran 2 hours 13 in 1985.
Ooh,
yeah.
Nice.
1985. So, the third, I'm very interested in the relationship between cardiovascular pathologies related to excessive endurance training. Do you do you think that specific endurance training could harm the heart muscle in the long run?
Yes.
Okay.
Not in every case, of course, because everybody's mileage will vary in terms of their experience of life, their health outcomes based on what they do. There are people that get away with living the worst lives and live to 100, smoking and drinking and whatever else.
Yeah.
And there are those that live so-called harmless lives that end up having a short life for whatever reason. So there is obviously a range around this, but here is the argument that says, look, this is the potential issue here. When you exercise a muscle a lot, that muscle tends at a certain force to become larger. It's called muscle hypertrophy. It's true of your skeletal muscles when they're working at or near the top end of their range. And it's also true of your heart muscle, because that's a muscle too. So your heart muscle can actually become bigger, and it can become bigger in such a way as to interfere with its own function. It becomes too bulky to do its job effectively. And that can lead to cardiac pathology later in life for former athletes on a case-by-case basis. If that doesn't happen, the second route by which these endurance athletes can end up with a problem is that they stop exercising at some point, because at some point you got to that sort of level, but the food appetites don't change. And so we get obesiogenesis, we get type 2 diabetes, we get inflammatory process, and we get heart disease through that route. So that's the other potential downside of it. I've always been an advocate for exercise should be very low intensity. For exercise, let's go for a walk for several hours.
Well, you mean specifically for cardiovascular exercise?
Well, what I mean there are two different things here. I think we need to be clear. There's exercise and there's training.
Okay, yeah. I share that.
Exercise is activity with no specific fitness increment goal.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get super fit by walking for hours.
Yeah.
So that's what exercise should be. It should be walking intensity. Exercise training ought to be at the other end, very high intensity. That's where you get training effect. All of this middle zone, all of this so-called endurance training, aerobic training, cardiovascular training, I advocate that this should not be done.
So to anyone who wants to start a 3-4 jogs a week, you should not do it. That's what you're saying?
Well, if your jog is at high intensity relative to your current max and goes for 30 minutes or less maximum 3 times a week, I don't have a problem with that.
Okay.
However, if you finish that 30-minute run thinking, oh, that was easy, I could have done that much quicker, Well, you should have done it much quicker then. Because actually, if you're in the middle there, you're just exercising. But you're exercising at an intensity that's not going to cause a training effect of meaningful value to you. But it is going to be a training, like a training load, a chronic training load.
Mm-hmm.
And all it's actually going to do over time is stop you from getting fitter and fitter and fitter. You know how like athletes always start getting fitter and then they stop getting fitter at a certain level and it becomes plateau and it's hard to get. That's what's going on. Too much training, not enough intensity. Sure, everyone's got a genetic limit that they will not be able to get beyond. But most athletes never get near that, even professional athletes, because even professional athletes are spending hours and hours and hours doing all of this training in the middle that's only dragging them down, actually.
You mean too much intensity and meaning also not enough rest, maybe?
Well, if you're training 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, some athletes are training 7 hours a day, right? Then there's no way you're recovering from that in between sessions.
So the inflammatory level, the
go
inflammatory level from someone who trains so hard, so long during the day, every day, is, I assume, logically quite elevated, right?
Yeah. Again, your mileage will vary, but yes, in general.
Which will have some impact in the future.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. But also, a muscle fiber, any given muscle fiber in your body, that fiber is trainable, not just in terms of its metabolic makeup, its ability to extract oxygen and use that to produce energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's also trainable physiologically, morphologically. Does that muscle fiber have light chain myosin? Does it have heavy chain myosin? Does it have enormous chain myosin? Is this a largely aerobic fiber or is this a more glycolytic fiber? And you know how you're probably taught there are 3 muscle fiber types?
Yeah.
Nonsense. There is a continuum of muscle fiber morphologies. Again, it's a simplification just so that students can understand, there are 3 main types. Rubbish. So a muscle fiber in the middle, if you lift heavy weights, it will move towards glycolytic ability.
Okay.
It will become bigger. That's muscle hypertrophy. It will become stronger, faster, but its fatigue resistance will be compromised. That same fiber in the middle, if you train lots and lots of endurance, hours and hours and hours, it goes the other way. It becomes smaller. It becomes more aerobic. It becomes less fatigable, but it becomes weaker, smaller. It strips muscle mass off you.
Yeah. So, are there any form of training other than endurance that could also reach an optimal stimulation of the heart muscle?
Yes. All exercise of all intensities activates the one and one only energy provision system that human beings have. The other thing you will have been taught, you have 3 energy systems. Yeah. You have an aerobic system and you have 2 anaerobic systems, one of which is the lactate system and one is the alactate system. Again, rubbish, nonsense, complete balderdash. You have one energy system that relies entirely on all of those components in order to function. It's the relative contributions of those systems that make the difference, not the fact that we have independently tappable systems. I'm going to use this system or I'm going to use that system. There's a threshold that we switch from the aerobic system to the anaerobic system. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. No. So if you want to stress your system in such a way as to cause it to train and become better, you have to meet or exceed your current capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And exercise in the middle is not going to do that. All you're going to do is pull your capacity back that way. And that's not what you want to do.
No. So for a while, most of my clients are between 40 and 60, some a little bit over 60. And
Mm-hmm.
I now do not advise them to do any, let's say, runs or jogs or anything like that. I advise them to work mostly and only through resistance training for three main reasons. Two, I'm pretty sure about them. The third one, I have a question to ask you about. The first one is, of course, you're going to overuse the joints. This is quite simple to understand. To high repetitive motion,
Yeah.
impact or not depends.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is the loss of muscle mass that you can observe
Mm-hmm.
on elite marathon runner. It's
Yeah.
also quite, and I think that if you want to prevent sarcopenia, which happens to everybody, I don't think that losing that muscle mass 20 years before that sarcopenia momentum is a good idea. So the
No.
third point would be, as the heart is also muscle, the sarcopenia effect that we observe on the skeletal muscle, does it occur as well on the heart muscle fiber?
Right. So mostly the heart muscle, if it's going to have an issue, that's going to be a hypertrophy issue, and it's going to be around hours and hours of the heart pumping at the force that's required to circulate blood during this zone 2 or aerobic middle zone training.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a hypertrophy influence. Sure, the heart might be beating harder than that when you're doing heavy resistance training, but that doesn't go on for hours and hours and hours. And if your weight training does go on for hours, you're doing it wrong. By the way, you should be in and out of that gym in 45 minutes, including shower.
Okay.
Whole body split 3 times a week, big compounds, big weight, no rest between sets. Do a big superset, 12 or 13 exercises, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down, back to the top, do your second set, out of here. That's how it should be approached, and when you understand the physiology involved, etc. And then, it's 48 hours at least before you're back in that gym, because you need to recover.
Yeah.
And that's not going to cause your heart to explode in size in the way that hours and hours and hours of this cardiovascular training absolutely will do at some point, probably.
But once people reach that age where when sarcopenia happens, the heart muscle cells do not lose that. For example, if you get a hypertrophy in someone's organ, do they lose these muscle fibers transforms into fat or not?
Not in the heart that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It certainly does happen in skeletal muscles.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I know what you're talking about there, but I don't think that occurs in the heart muscle.
Because I was wondering if that happens, then that's a third risk that people take. But okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Cool.
Now we have covered these important points. The following point, which has got my interest recently. I'm talking about the relationship between sugar vegetable oils and deuterium. Could you please tell the audience what is deuterium, how it can negatively affect our health, and how can we avoid it?
Yeah. Okay. So deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. So earlier we were talking about different nitrogen isotopes. The same thing is true with hydrogen, in that most hydrogen is made up of a proton and an electron. Deuterium is a proton, a neutron, and an electron. Most of the weight of the hydrogen is in the proton, and almost none of it is in the electron. So ostensibly, by adding a neutron, you're basically, give or take, doubling the mass of a hydrogen. It's a heavy hydrogen, this deuterium. Deuteriums exist in nature as an amount of the hydrogen atoms that are found will be deuterium rather than hydrogen. And the way that fats are put together by animals versus by plants, animal fat will be deuterium depleted, and plant fat tends to be higher in deuterium level because of the way in which the Krebs cycle runs in one direction or the other. It's one of the offshoots of that, basically. Deuterium is not a good thing in the human body above normal levels because in your mitochondria that make the ATP, there is this piece of machinery called the H0H1 ATPase. Mm-hmm. It's a motor. It's a protein that sits in the membranes, and this thing spins around at 400 revolutions per second. And the thing that causes it to spin around, and it's that force that is used to create the ATP, what you have to do is you have to fire protons through it. And it's that which causes an electromagnetic. That's what causes the spinning. When you get a hydrogen ion that happens to be a deuterium, it's heavier, it plugs up, it causes a misfire of that engine. Ergo, it interferes with your ability to create ATP for energy. Ergo, energy levels can drop. Inflammation is a necessary side hack of that. And if you spend your whole life chugging deuterium, that's going to mess you up in the long term. So the best thing to do is to avoid sources of both water and food that are high in deuterium.
How do you know water can be high in deuterium, for example?
You'd have to test your local water, or have your local water tested to know, or ask somebody that's able to do that kind of testing to do it. One of the ways that you can deuterium deplete drinking water is you can get, let's say you're going to drink a litre of water in a day. Again, I don't think you should measure or count or drink a litre of water because you should. I mean, you should drink when you're thirsty and stop when you're not. I'm just giving you something to grasp onto. We have a litre of water. Put it in the freezer for just long enough that you get that cap of ice over the top, but the rest of it's still liquid. Take that cap of ice off, chuck it away. Deuterium depleted water.
Okay.
Deuterium water freezes before the bulk water. So there's a way to get rid of it that way. Eat animal-based fat and not plant-based fat or oil ever is the other way to do it. A third way you can do it is by this dry fasting fad that's going on, because if you oxidize your own fat to produce metabolic water, that's deuterium depleted as well. So they're the three main ways that you can keep that under control.
Okay. Cool. Well, I hope this is clear for everyone. And if you need more details, I would highly recommend you to listen the interview Professor Bart Kay gave to Sarah Pugh recently. It was very, very interesting, because there are not many people who talk about these topics in the nutrition field. And I feel this is quite very important. So just to make a relationship with that, you have been quite clear about the importance of grounding. Could you please tell what exactly is grounding and why it is very beneficial for the health?
Yeah. So grounding is making an electrical connection between yourself and the earth. Mm-hmm. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? That sounds like, oops, now you've gone across. Now it's woo-woo. We knew it was going to happen sooner or later. It's not. It's actual good science.
Okay.
We evolved grounded. We lived on the earth. We walked around on the earth barefoot. We slept on the ground in caves, mostly.
Yeah.
It's only the last 150, 200 years or so that we've started living in electrically insulated housing. We've put rubber on the soles of our shoes. We drive around in cars with rubber on them. We're insulated from the earth most of our lives. Our bodies aren't expecting that. We're expected to be a part of the electromagnetic field of the earth. And when you ground yourself electrically, there are a number of benefits that you will accrue, it seems, based on the research that's available so far on this topic. Short-term studies, small-scale studies, but quite convincing results nonetheless. Wound healing is more rapid when you ground regularly. Sleep quality is better. Aberrant cortisol profiles normalize. Your effective blood viscosity, the thickness of your blood, thins down the second you're grounded. It's actually by a factor of 3. Quite impressive.
But these have been, I'm just asking, these have been shown through experimental studies in humans?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. As I say, usually these are not huge numbers of people. They're usually like, subject numbers 8 or 12 or something like that, whatever. Usually they're fairly short-term, immediate effect type studies or over a couple of weeks. Sure. But what I'm saying is that the results of these kind of pilot studies are quite convincing in terms of the separation of the observed variable. It's quite, that's quite an effect. So I'm prepared to say there is at least some indication here that it might be useful, and there's no indication that it's problematic in any way. Okay. So on balance, I'm going to do it. And I think there's benefits. Certainly, in terms of all the stuff I've been talking about there. So that's good stuff. I think grounding is a good thing. How do you do it? Well, you can get grounding equipment from many companies all over the world. There's all sorts of people selling it. It's not hard to get hold of.
Or just go outside and walk.
Exactly. Or you can just actually go outside, take your shoes and socks off and, be on the ground, which would ideally be dirt or grass, not concrete or asphalt or whatever. And by the way, sand also is not a great conductor because it's made of glass, and glass is not electrically conductive. You can, of course, go to the beach and put your toes in the water and be grounded because the water is a source of grounding. But, yeah. Okay.
But I'm always amazed to see that these kind of simple things are not advised by doctors most of the times, and that they're able to push the calories in, calories out nonsense. But these kind of very simple things seems to be quite far from their knowledge.
Yeah.
Why is that?
A person needs to understand that the things that a medical doctor has in their head, the so-called knowledge, the so-called whatever it is, you need to understand that the message these people are taught in their training is a message that is bought and paid for. It's not based on what's best for patients. If you think that doctors are trained based on what's best for patients, I'm sorry, you're deluded, because that's not the case. They are trained to behave in a certain way, to think in a certain way, to act in a certain way, and they are trained that way because the people that trained them to do that have been bought and paid for by, for example, companies that make drugs. Nothing to do with patient welfare or what's good for a patient or what's simple or correct. In fact, it's better as a doctor if you can make it sound far more complex than it really is. You can say things like, well, what we have here clearly is an idiopathic case of blah, 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 whatever. Use words that people don't understand. Because when a doctor says idiopathic, do you know what that means? It means we have no idea what the cause is.
Yeah.
So you have idiopathic constipation. That's what's going on here. Oh, good. What's the cure for that?
I don't know.
Well, they'll tell you it's fiber. It isn't. Fiber will make it worse.
So that was my next questions.
Oh, well, there you go.
When I speak about the harmful effect of sugar and vegetables to clients, the most common question I get from people is, but okay, you eat only meat, but how do you get your fiber? And
Right.
is fiber important for human beings?
Absolutely not. In fact, if anything, the evidence such that we have would suggest that fiber is most likely to be damaging to your colonic function, to your gut function, and to your function as an organism at the whole level. This idea that we need fiber in our diets is absolute rubbish. We do not need fiber in our diets.
What about
There are a number of arguments. Go on.
Yeah, no, because people would tell you, well, there are many studies about the microbiome now.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep, absolutely. What I can tell you about those studies is this. Even with those studies existing, the current state of knowledge is this. We know for sure and definite vastly more about the surface of Mars than we know about the gut microbiome, how it works, and what a good microbiome is. Your microbiome is generally going to be optimized according to what it is that you do chronically eat. What is your diet? That will inform your microbiome. There are a number of diets that are supportive of microbiome setups that are apparently happy and healthy. And there's not just one, here are the good bugs, here are the bad bugs.
mm-hmm.
And that's just nonsense. It's a vastly complex community of different species living together in peace and happiness or at war with one another. What is a good microbiome? Well, it's the microbiome that is possessed by a person who is apparently healthy. And they come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. There's this idea that diversity is the key to a good microbiome in the same way that balance is a good thing in our diet. Rubbish. There are people with diverse microbiomes who are as ill as possible, really unhealthy gut-wise.
But my guess...
What's the difference? Well, it depends what they're eating is the difference.
But my guess or my feeling is that now, okay, sugar, refined sugar is bad. Nobody claims the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Carbs is
Mm-hmm.
more likely known to be not so good. So
Mm-hmm.
now I feel the sugar industry or the cereal industry is now telling, well, what's in it is wrong, but the good thing is what's around it, the fiber. And that's the last bullet they have probably to promote their products.
Yeah.
That's my...
And when people, exactly. And when people finally understand that if anything, fiber is likely to destroy your gut function rather than be helpful in any way, then that will evaporate as well. They won't have that one left either. However, it takes a long, long time for people to click onto and to grasp onto an idea that runs contrary to what they've been told their whole lives. People have an aversion to having been wrong their whole lives.
Yeah.
People will, if you say something to people enough times at large, people will start to accept what they are being told as the truth because they're hearing it so many times from so many different directions. That doesn't make it true.
Mm-hmm.
It's not true. Safe and effective and safe, for example.
Yeah. And I spoke to a French doctor the other day who was promoting the Mediterranean diet, and he said, I'm not a proponent of the ketogenic diet because he said there is no science. And I was thinking of the book that was made, I think, by the Knox Foundation or the ketogenic book. And
Yeah.
after each chapter, there are probably 7 to 8 pages of scientific references.
Yeah.
And I was so surprised that this guy was saying
Right.
there was no science.
Well, let's cover that. During a 5 to 7 year period of training that most medical practitioners receive, guess how much training they get on human nutrition?
My brother is in the 6th year. He got 16 hours so far.
There you go. And those 16 hours of human nutrition, such that it was it good information, or was it the stuff that's bought and paid for, the rubbish that he's been taught?
Yeah, the good old stuff. 50%
Right.
carbs.
Yeah.
And the rest.
Absolute rubbish. That's the last thing you should do. Yeah.
So why a carnivore's diet is advised for whoever has gut or intestinal issues?
Well, because it's the species appropriate, species specific diet that's most likely to lead you to health. Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, let's before we move off these doctors talking about what the science is. Well, okay, maybe they get 16 hours of false information on nutrition. How much training do you think doctors get on science, pure science?
You mean biology or physiology?
I mean science. I mean the way that science is conducted, the statistical procedures by which science is conducted, the disciplines of setting up scientific investigations, how to interpret scientific literature.
Not much either, I guess.
None. They're not scientists. Doctors are not a branch of science. They're a branch of medicine. They have no business talking about science any more than they have any business talking about nutrition to people. That is not their field. Their field is allopathic medicine. That's where they should confine their commentary. Simple as that.
Yeah. So, but I guess I feel that now more and more younger generation of doctors are speaking more openly and are quite, I mean, that's just maybe an impression, but I feel that there are more and more speaking out through the YouTube and the social networks available compared to the previous generation, probably.
Yeah, I guess so. And that's probably more to do, I think, with the availability of social media widely, more than any other factor, perhaps. Hopefully in the future, the message will get through. People will understand that everything you've been told about human health and human nutrition is in some way false and informed at the end of the day by it being bought and paid for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, I think we covered quite many interesting topics today for you. Thank you very much, Bart.
Pleasure.
And so people can follow you on your channel, which is...
The easiest way to find me is to go to the YouTubes and type in at BART-KAY. The first 10 pages that come up will be me.
Okay. And you said in the beginning that you are a marketer for a brand that sells stem cells products. And that was maybe, that would be my last questions. I don't think you're the kind of person that would follow the crowd or the current. So why did you choose that brand and that kind of product specifically?
Okay. On a species appropriate, species specific diet, the nutritional supplementation requirements are none. Everything you need is in the diet. This product is not a supplement nutrition wise to speak of. This is a nutraceutical. It has a known effect on the human body, much like a prescription drug, with the difference being that this one is not a prescription drug. It's a naturally occurring substance that's been discovered, put together and marketed as a product that people can buy. What does it do? It causes your bone marrow to release your adult stem cells, whereupon they will go forth and repair and renew your body in all sorts of miraculous ways. The reason that I aligned with this company is because their product does exactly what it says it does, and there's evidence in the literature to support that claim.
Okay.
I've used the product myself for about 15 years, and I've had miraculous, life-changing health benefits associated with taking that product. If you want to find out more about it, it's up there.
Okay.
That's all you do. You just go to that site. All the information there's, the shop's there, everything's there. Just go for it.
All right. Great. Thank you again,
Cool.
Bart.
My pleasure. All right.
And all the best to you, and see you soon. Bye.
Thanks. Cheers.
Bye-bye.